This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Falcons analyst Jarvis Davis and Locked On host, Falcons host, that is, Aaron Freeman. Senior Falcons reporter Tori McElhaney will be back with us next week. The Atlanta Football Party is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I think the Falcons are still applying pressure. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about 11. Is he in the top 3? We'll discuss. And also, wait, what? Jarvis, Aaron, the long-suffering Falcons faithful are getting some love. We'll discuss that as well. But first things first, let's talk about whether or not a stop in college lends itself to continuity. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Falcons were one of 2 teams without a transfer player in this year's draft class. And when you really think about the magnitude of that, it's not just about the fact that 2 out of 32 teams were the only 2 that didn't have a player who transferred. When you think about all the players that passed through the portal, that is mind-boggling that the Falcons were able to do that. Terry Fontenot said this about it, quote, "You have some people that have been at 3 different schools, and it does make it more challenging for scouts to go to a lot of different sources and different places and piece together information. But I would say, no, it's not a disqualifier to go to a lot of different schools. Obviously not, because QB1 went to multiple schools and they did just fine in their scouting of Michael Penix Jr. But talking about this year's draft class and being able to do that, Jarvis, as confident as you may be about how the Falcons scout team did on the players the teams eventually drafted this season, does this little nugget maybe make you a little more confident about their picks?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think that they're being intentional about what they actually want, right? Because I think that when you talk about consistency, culture, Falcons ethos, however you may feel about it, like you said, but there is one thing about being intentional and getting the type of players that you want into the building. And I think that, I think back to when I was in college. And the one thing about transfers and JUCO players, I didn't play with JUCO players until my junior year when we brought in a whole new offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Because my coach despised JUCO guys because he wants to bring guys in from a freshman, and then help them understand what we're trying to do, who we want them to be as players, and have those 4-year guys. And I think that the fact that the Falcons actually was able to pull this off in the NFL in today's world, where guys are it's almost guaranteed that you're gonna go at least 2 schools nowadays. So I think that there is a level of culture and consistency that the Falcons want, and I have no problem with it, because I never forget when we had a guy transfer from South Carolina. He came down, big guy, throw up the whole weight room and everything. Then we got out on the field. We were just like, "You were at an SEC school? How'd that work?" We used to look at transfers like the plague. Like, those cats had to literally go through the ringer, literally, in order to establish themselves with us so we can be accepting of them. So, yeah, I think this is very interesting. When I came across it, I was just like, oh, my gosh, that is like, there's some intentionality there that the Falcons are trying to pull off, and hopefully it kind of reap the benefit of it in year 1 of this class.
Yeah. And Aaron, like Terry Fontenot said, nothing is wrong with transfers. We know that is a part of the college landscape and probably will be a part of the college landscape. But there is something to be said, to Jarvis's point, about being in a system and having some continuity in that system across time that could be viable for this Falcons team, as far as them being able to hit the ground running and being able to count on how that stability might be an advantage for the Falcons. But what do you think about the fact that very unique statistic of being one of 2 teams to indeed have a whole draft class full of non-transfer players?
Yeah, I tend to lean more that it's probably more of a coincidence than necessarily the plan, right? But at the same time, it does feel like with having 5 picks, right, your chances of having some of these weird quirks probably goes up just because you're not having the normal, 7, 8, 9 picks and, 6-rounder that, went to Michigan State that didn't transfer to Iowa or something like that probably is more likely to happen in that situation. But I do think, it's still, I think it is reflective of what Jarvis is saying, where it's like, I do think there is some intention behind it, not specifically like we don't target guys that haven't transferred, but it's more that we're targeting guys that may be a little bit more of a high floor guys because they stuck in the same system for, multiple years, and they got the development under a coaching staffs and whatnot, as opposed to, and again, why guys transfer, is varied across the college landscape, but a lot of times it's like, oh, I want to be closer to home. Oh, my coach got fired, and so I'm going to follow him to another school, or go to another school, or whatever, or my team has stunk for the last 3 years. I went to the program that is on the downward trend, and now I want to go and go win somewhere. And I think with the Falcons picks, a lot of these guys went to big programs, storied programs that had opportunities. Like Billy Bowman's a good example of a guy that, Oklahoma has not been quite to the level the last couple of years that they normally had been, over the last, 3 decades in terms of college football. And he had an opportunity to go pro last year, but he kind of decided to stick around because of the sort of leadership characteristics to continue to push forward to try to be, to lift that program up. And I think that's where where like the intentionality of what the Falcons are doing, like those are the things when we talk about the Falcons ethos and the makeup and the character that this team targets, like those things are what they value for a team. So I don't think it's a coincidence that a player like that are the types of guys that the Falcons want. But at the same time, I think Terry Fontenot's right, where it's like they wouldn't disqualify a guy just simply because, like he decided to transfer his final year for whatever reason that is. But I do think that Venn diagram of overlap, I think, makes a lot of sense given what the Falcons value and some of these players that do stick it out at some of these big programs, and guys like Xavier Watts and Jalen Walker. Obviously, Notre Dame and Georgia have been very successful, and so it's easier for those guys to say, like, yeah, we're competing at the highest level, so why would I transfer at this stage? But for other guys, I think like Billy Bowman, playing in good programs but aren't necessarily at the top of the league, is telling, I think, in terms of what the Falcons value.
Yeah, and I think to 2 points, Free, that you made, Jarvis, I wanted you to weigh in on as well, is the first is that when you look at a guy like a Jalen Walker, or really even like you said, an Xavier Watts, being in those programs where there's a depth chart that's probably deeper than most NFL teams, and for those players to say, hey, I'm going to stay in this system because I see the value in staying in the system, I think that could be something that was important, a value to this Falcons franchise. I also think, to Free's point, Jarvis, it's the floor. The Falcons are not in a position, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to pick a bunch of players with just a high ceiling. You kind of need them to walk in the door with the high floor. So I think the fact that, and oftentimes when you're in those programs, the reason that you have a high floor, no offense, is because you have peaked in a good way, meaning that you've shown us the very best of what you have because your program has required that of you. Your conference has required that of you throughout the entirety of your college career. So it allows you to be able to hit the ground running.
Absolutely, man. And that's what Kirby Smart values, right? I can kind of liken him to like my coach in college. Like, he wants those guys to come in. He's going to have a plan for them, and he's going to be very explicit about that plan when they first step in. And these guys got to get in line, not necessarily from a standpoint of it's only going to benefit me, but it's going to benefit you also. Just look at my track record of guys on the defensive side of football. And I'm glad you mentioned Jalen Walker, because that's what he said for him. He's like, hey, man, you're going to be my 2-3 tool guy. You're going to be stand up inside linebacker. You're going to be out on the edge. We're going to move you around. You're going to be our spy guy. Like, all of those things, and like getting those guys to see the vision that Kirby has for him. I think those type of guys being able to understand that and not saying and taking offense by it and saying, oh, well, I should be the starter guy. I want to be on the edge and rush the passer and all that. That's how I'm going to get my money and get to the league. No, they understand it. God, Daddy is a football coach. They understand it. You get it. You see the basis of those guys. Like what Free talked about with Billy Bowman. Not necessarily going to win games like we used to do winning, but he understands what Brent Venables brings to the table as a coach and the type of guys that he's putting in the league when he was at Clemson as a defensive coordinator. So it's just all those things kind of boil down to understanding what the coach has in mind and those guys being used to that level of transparency and just being clear about what they expect from that player. Those players then take that and let it be their foundation as they go into the league. And that's when you're talking about raising the floor. Hey, I don't have to teach this guy how to do whatever. You know, I know there are certain level of things that he's going to be able to do that other player that might have a higher ceiling, and he didn't get that foundation. So it's less work for that particular coach or, you know, that position coach when you're coming in, when you have a guy who have those high floor guys, and then the sky's the limit once they get into the league.
You know, I was sitting here as you were talking, thinking like, okay, how am I going to position this? Because Free, I don't want to sound negative. I don't want to sound like I'm insulting the Falcons. But Jarvis just said it. That might potentially, even if it's subconscious, that might potentially be something where you look at that player, they've been in that one program, they've excelled and evolved within that one philosophy. And you're thinking, okay, on the defensive side of the ball, yes, Jeff Ulbrich has been a defensive coordinator and has been with the Falcons, but this is his first year officially under Raheem Morris without, of course, Rod with the interim tag, right? And then you look at Zach Robinson, only his second year as an offensive coordinator. Wouldn't it make sense that you want guys that you don't have to put that much work into, because maybe the work that they put in the 2 or 3 years in the same system in college, it could be advantageous for you?
Yeah, I think you make a great point there where, you know, when you're trying to piece this thing together, and, you know, we talked last week about being intentional about using these rookies and playing these rookies, unlike the previous year in 2024. You know, you want to find these guys that have a skill set, and that skill set typically, you know, is defined when you get multiple years, you know, whether it's in the same system, but in the same program where like you stay there, as opposed to if you're constantly moving around different programs. You know, you could be at Iowa State one year and they'll use you a certain way, and then you transfer to Michigan State the next year and they'll use you a different way. Then you're at Vanderbilt and they'll use you a different way, or whatever. And so you don't have that sort of confusion, I think, with some of these transfer players and these guys that have stayed in the same program, and many of them being under the same head coaches for multiple years. And so you can say, okay, we know this guy does X, Y, and Z, you know, specifically well. And when we're trying to piece these things together and we're trying to collect this group of rookies and balance it with the veterans, you want to have guys that you know what they're bringing to the table. And so I do think these guys that are in one program for, you know, 4 or 5 years, as opposed to constantly transferring, you know, you do have a little bit more, a higher hit rate, I think, with those types of guys than you would with the guys that are constantly moving around.
Yeah. And I just wanted to point something out, and this is more of from the Jarvis Davis file of they do listen to us. There was an article, and I know Tori would appreciate this. Of course, she'll be back with us next week, but there was an article on AtlantaFalcons.com, speaking of a player that actually did benefit from going to multiple programs. There's an article about Michael Penix Jr. I don't know if you guys recall, but we were talking about just last week, I think it was on our Thursday show, about his progress, and just seeing that one thing in those last couple of games that may have actually made you think, okay, he's our guy. And there was an article that they posted about some things that TJ Yates said about dialing back the aggressiveness just a little bit and that might be a key lesson for Penix to learn in 2025. Obviously, aggressiveness, double-edged sword, they were saying. But for you guys, if you had your druthers, and think about it from the perspective of not just Penix's first full season, but also now that we know what that schedule is looking like, especially in the beginning, I think I'm going to say Free mentioned it, but JD, it may have been you, that for the defense, we have to give them some opportunity to progress into what we think they're going to be. But do you want the Falcons? Would you prefer to see them, hey, gun it, hey, go for it, let's see what MPX can do and be aggressive with him? Or do you want them to kind of slowly bring him along?
Well, when I look at the early part of the schedule, I'm like, it's hard because that's a tough part of the schedule, and you're like, you kind of need him to kind of gun it if you're going to win those games and outscore some of those offenses. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want Michael Penix in the first start of the season throwing the ball 50 times, in order to beat the Bucs, like we had to see last year with Kirk Cousins in that first Thursday night game against the Bucs or whatever, and throw for 500 yards. So, like, I mean, I'm not going to complain about a 500-yard Michael Penix game. So I'll take it either way. But like, I don't want the Falcons to have to feel like they have that pressure on Michael Penix. So I would prefer a slow play, but at the same time, I'm not going to complain about, them putting that pedal to the metal, starting out the season.
Free. Come on, man. I thought you were going to mention it. I'm glad you didn't, because I have something to say now. No, the biggest safety valve he has is just turn around and handing that mother blanking ball off to Bijan Robinson. That's what's going to slow him down, right? Give him 15 to 20, 25 touches. Like, come on, let's go. That's the easiest, that's a simple solution, right? Because that's what's going to help Michael Penix not get hit too much. Because when you get into those games, like he mentioned, like Free mentioned, that you have to score points, you can turn around and hand the ball off to him too as well. And then once you get those defenses coming up and playing tight, then you can find Drake with the medium and then 50-50 balls, right? You can find Kyle Pitts in the check downs. I know you probably don't like that, but hey, man, that's what it is, bro. Darnell Mooney going up top, being that one-on-one. Ray McLeod, hopefully he can get involved in that situation as well, with the deep ball. So there are so many things that factors with the type of guys that they have on this roster all the way. There shouldn't be too many moments in this season where Zach Robinson said, MPX, you're going to have to win us this game and you're going to have to throw it 50 times. Like, hey, that's what it is. And I would be hard-pressed to see that happen more than twice this year, because it's just too many guys, too many factors, offensive line, all that stuff in that run game that they can just build off of in order to continue to put points on the board.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it too from a holistic perspective, like the run game, the fact that, yes, you have a Bijan Robinson in the backfield, but if you need a couple of yards, and of course, I'm harkening back to a couple of years ago when you might be at a 3rd and 2 and throw it. But now I think you are in a situation where between Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, you don't have to do that. It's good that you have a quarterback that can actually get it done if you call for that, but you don't actually have to do it. And I think that's what makes that a beautiful thing. So Jarvis always says he likes the competition. Free, you like when they apply pressure too. A signing on Friday might just be that. We'll talk about that when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Skylight Calendar. Say goodbye to sticky notes, scribble plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. The sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders, all in one easy-to-see place. What would it mean to eliminate the excuse from your family's routine? Or could assigning everyone their own color finally solve the who does what confusion in your house? And for me, that probably is the most exciting part, because my nephew will be here for the summer. He's going to have all these track and field practices and track meets. I need a way to be able to track this kid. And one of the influencers that I follow on social media absolutely swears by it. So it already kind of started investigating it. Can't wait to actually put it into use. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. So go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/NFL. Right now, Skylight's offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars. So go to skylightcal.com right after you finish watching the Atlanta Football Party. Get your life organized. So, Aaron, the Falcons announced late Friday they signed UDFA O-lineman Michael Gonzalez to the active roster, released O-lineman Joey Fisher. Gonzalez, of course, put in some work at center during minicamp. So what do you like about this signing? What do you like about the fact that this might just keep applying pressure on a guy that Coach Lunsford kind of sort of alluded, or Ledford rather, kind of sort of alluded to, was already the starting center in Ryan Newsel. Feel like this might still apply some pressure?
Well, I don't know if it's going to apply some pressure, but just because, like, you mentioned it, like Gonzalez got some work in minicamp at center, but like he didn't get that much work in college at center. I don't think he actually played a single snap at Louisville at the center position. And so you have a bunch of guys that are going to be competing for that backup center spot behind Ryan Newsel, like Michael Gonzalez, like Joshua Gray, like Javon Gwynn, and all these guys are guard center converts. Right, they played primarily guard, or Gray played primary tackle in college, and they're sort of getting their start at center. And it's interesting because Ryan Newsel was that type of player as well, that he played primarily guard at App State, dabbled a little bit at center, but primarily has been a center in the NFL. So it does feel like the Falcons are looking for the next Ryan Newsel, as opposed to a guy that's going to come in right away and has those reps at center that you can say, oh, this guy's going to really come in and push Ryan Newsel right away. So I don't know if this is applying the pressure that I think we want. Like, again, you want that guy that's like, I've actually done, I've spent many time playing that center spot. But the other thing that I think is interesting is just like Ledford just keeps collecting guys that he wasn't able to recruit. He actually successfully recruited Michael Gonzalez, because when Michael Gonzalez committed to Louisville, Dwayne Ledford was the O-line coach and then left to come to Atlanta. So he never got to coach Gonzalez. But like Javon Gwynn was a guy that when Ledford was at, I think, NC State, he tried to recruit him there. Brandon Parker, when Ledford was at NC State, he tried to recruit there. So it's very clear that Dwayne Ledford has a long memory, and he's going up to Terry and like, hey, Terry, this guy I've had my eye on for like the last 8 years. Like, come and bring him in, get this guy, so it does feel like Dwayne Ledford is kind of dictating, who he wants to bring in on the offensive line. So I think that's where I kind of like, okay, obviously Dwayne Ledford deserves and has earned a lot of clout here with how he's handled things these last, 4 or so years as the O-line coach and run game coordinator. So it's like, okay, let's see what Michael Gonzalez got. Can we get the next Ryan Newsel? So, I don't know if it's going to boost the competition today right now, but at the same time, it's like, will we be looking back, 3-4 years from now and be like, oh yeah, that low key Michael Gonzalez pickup that the Falcons had, he's turning into that backup sort of that Newsel and having that same career path, 3-4 years down the road that we're seeing with Newsel at this point.
Yeah, and that actually could be one of the reasons that Ledford said, hey, we'll bring him on. Another reason is injury. Like, you definitely don't want to think that, but for someone who, to Aaron's point, is sort of the prototype Ryan Newsel that they like and that has worked out for the Falcons, then you get that another prototype in that room, if you will, to say, hey, should Ryan Newsel go down, then we've got somebody who, hey, we can transition to center just like we did him, and he should be fine. But yeah, Jarvis, do you feel like that applies any pressure or makes for any kind of quote unquote good competition in that O-lineman room, particularly under center?
Not for Ryan Newsel. I mean, this man is being called a starter. He ain't even got a doggone contract. Like, shoot, you know what? Like, what NFL player has that type of job stability? This man ain't even signed, and they already talking about, yep, we comfortable with him being a starter. All good over here, baby. But seriously though, I think this type of signing is one of those signings where you say, okay, they're trying to get as much depth as possible, right? Like, it's going to be a competition amongst those guys that Free mentioned, Joshua Grays, the Javon Gwynns, and Michael Gonzalez. Yeah, they're going to be competing. They trying to figure it out. Like, hey, man, I got a chance. When you don't have an established veteran at that center spot, right, behind Ryan Newsel. So, yeah, they're trying to compete for a center spot. So, I think, and then with them having the experience at guard as well, because we never know. Shoot, Bergeron might get hurt. God forbid that, or Chris Lindstrom might get hurt. Please don't let that happen, Lord. So we have all of those different factors. That's why they cross-train those guys like that, because you can take a guard and, hey, have him working at center, and you know that he has X amount of snaps. I think Michael Gonzalez had like 51 games at the left guard spot, for Louisville. So when you think about it from that standpoint, okay, it's a double take, right? So if somebody get hurt at center, he can step in. Somebody get hurt at that guard spot, he can step in if he beats those other guys out. So yeah, I think this is one of those depth signings, and I, like I said, I don't have any issue with it. I just find it very interesting that they're talking about a guy being a starter and he's not under contract. So like, I hope at some point, News, what's up, baby? You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna try to find out who your agent is, Brian, because I know a lot of people listen to this show. Let me see if I can get some information out there, man. Because this is
it's very bizarre.
Man, that's job stability to its finest right there.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. It's almost like saying, and then I think about the message being sent out to the rest of the league, like, yeah, we hadn't signed him, but we're gonna keep letting you know he's our guy. He's our guy. He's our guy. So no one comes after him for depth on their O-line. But you guys just mentioned something that was actually very, I don't know that we've talked about it a lot, because we always talk about depth, right? And we always talk about stability and the possibility of having someone who can be inserted very quickly should something happen. But then look at this O-line. Jake Matthews, Matthew Bergeron, Ryan Newsel, we'll give him the de facto, Chris Lindstrom, and Caleb McGarry. When's the last time we talked about any of them being out for a game, let alone multiple games?
Yeah, Jake is Jay's an interesting study, right? Like, you just can count on him being there. He just, regardless of how you feel about him, top 15 tackle in the league, bottom 15 tackle in the league, whatever, he's going to be there, and he's gonna give you exactly what he put out there on tape on a consistent basis. And from an O-line coach perspective, if I'm Dwayne Leffert, that's what I want. Consistency. That's what it's all about, offensive line. Like, you don't have to have 5 great guys. All you got to do is have 5 guys that you know exactly what you're going to get each and every Sunday. So the offensive coordinator can call plays accordingly. You know what I'm saying? I know Caleb McGarry, he's probably going to struggle with that speed rushing. You know what I'm saying? They're going to see that on film. They're going to line them up over there. All I need him just to block him on first and second down and wear him down. And then on third down, shoot, when it's third and medium, he can't peel his ears back. You know, we can pass the ball. Ball going to be going at 1.5. So I ain't worried about Brian Burns, no more. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one of those things where you look at it and say, okay, this is one of those things where you say that this is the thing that we want. We want that consistency. We want that thing to really just speak to us as far as what this player is, what he can do. And then you can if you have that in multiple guys, Caleb McGarry barely gets hurt. People want him to get hurt. Chris Lindstrom, shoot, man. Chris Lindstrom he's just there, and he's really, really good. So
yes,
and when you have, and Matthew Bergeron falling in line with that too, like, all right, everybody out here playing, ain't nobody getting hurt. Yeah, that's what you want. And and Drew Dahlman, he's no longer here. That's probably why the Falcons let him ride. Shoot, yeah. Hey, bro, you miss 8 games. You trying to get one of the highest paid centers in the league? Nah, man, we used to a certain standard around here. So yeah, I think this is one of those things that's really cool to see. That having that continuity at offensive line, it just opened up so many things for you as a play caller. So yeah, the Falcons value that, and just fingers crossed that they don't get hit with that injury bug this year.
Yeah, because we know we've seen it in years past. But yeah, they really had a pretty solid year last year as far as having that availability for that starting O-line. And Free, as much as we talk about what Caleb McGarry can't do, I think that ultimately, if you look at them holistically, they're still not bad, because Kirk Cousins, who could have been called a statue on some level last season, was still 22nd in the league as far as hit QBs. So on some level, that O-line as a collective was still getting it done. So I think, to you guys' earlier point, there's no reason for the Falcons to have felt that they had to hang on to Drew Dahlman, because they got some serviceability out of Ryan Newsel. And then the collective was just fine in giving Kirk Cousins what he needed in order to be able to get the ball down the field. And you've got someone in Michael Penix Jr. who has a little bit more mobility to be able to really take advantage of what that O-line brings. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to point that out, Free, because I know oftentimes we'll talk about the O-line and we'll talk about kind of the consistency piece, or the depth piece, but the consistency piece is pretty good, such that you haven't had a need for that depth in a little while, other than, like we said, those games for Dalton.
Yeah. You had McGarry miss a couple of games, the last couple of years, but nothing like devastating to the point. Because I think Jarvis is right when we talk about the consistency of the O-line. Like, the thing that has been consistent for this offensive line the last 5-6 years is that right side of their offensive line with Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry, and that's being sort of the strength. We always talk, as you said, T, we always talk about what Caleb McGarry can't do, but sometimes you want to flip the script and be like, well, he can do certain things really well. And when him and Chris Lindstrom are really getting going in a run game, that is a major strength for this Falcons offensive line. And, they've been able to maximize that a lot these last couple of years because you've had the relative stability and health of those guys not missing a ton of time. And so I think the depth and the stability and the continuity, all those things are huge factors in the success of this offense and this team moving forward up front, because when you're constantly changing teams, it's one of the things I've been tracking for a long time, where it's just like there's a very strong correlation between the Falcons' team success and having the same starting 5 guys starting every game or the majority of games each and every year. And so, like, it's one of those things where, like, stability and continuity matter for the offensive line.
Yeah, well, continuity from one guy for the Falcons for most of his career actually got him into the top 3. Is that where he belongs? We'll talk about that on the other side. So as we know, this is list season. Let the list begin. So everybody who watches the Atlanta Falcons football party, get ready, because it's about to be a list situation for at least the next 6 to 8 weeks. So one of the lists that came out that I thought was interesting was from Pro Football Focus. They released their all PFF team ranking the best players of the last 25 years at every position. And they took the 25 because that's how long PFF has been in the business of ranking any and all things. So with this one, like I said, they went position by position. And on the offensive side of the ball, particularly with wide receivers, Julio Jones made the cut. He was one of 3 wideouts who made the cut, along with Antonio Brown and Tyreek Hill. So when you look, Jarvis, across the landscape of wide receivers for the last quarter of a century, first off, is Jones in your top 3?
Absolutely, 1,000%. And the fact that PFF, you doggone stat nerds, how you gonna leave out Randy Moss and doggone Terrell Owens? Like, what are we talking about here? Antonio Brown, yeah, man, I get it, I understand it, but man, Randy Schmandy, that's what we used to call him, because we used to play with him on Madden. Like, we used to almost have to outlaw that dude. Like, you can't play with Randy Moss. Like, him and Michael Vick were 2 players that were outlawed, especially when it comes to gambling. If you're in that type of thing, you know what I'm saying? Not saying that I was, but I'm just saying.
But for those who might,
I was around people who were into that type of thing. You know what I mean?
So,
yeah, you know what I'm saying? So, that's what it is. But but seriously though, yeah, he's definitely in the top 3, because I'm the type of guy. That was the diva era of the wide receiver. Like, I kind of miss those days when you just had wide receivers just flying off at the mouth and just saying whatever came to their mind, from doing sit-ups in the driveway to Julio wanting to doggone an adjustment to his contract. Man, give me all that. Randy Moss, fake mooning in the doggone Green Bay in the end zone. Like, man, give me all of that. I want that, because it was just so great for the game, and those guys were just uber talented. So yeah, that's my top 3. So yes, he's in my top 3, and I got Randy and T.O. right there with him in that top, in the past 25 years. Yeah, got to do it. Got to do it.
Those are good calls. Those are good calls to say, hey, as much as we love Antonio Brown and all the work that he could do, Tyreek Hill and the work he put in, sometimes it's that recency effect.
Cockroach wide receivers, man. You know what I'm saying? Give me some size, baby. Free don't look like that, man. People gonna think I'm trying to be.
That's not what I thought was coming out of
I never know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, like at all.
Every show you're gonna say something that is going to catch me off guard. I did not expect that word to be the word that came out of your mouth. I've heard you call players and receivers cockroach wide receivers, but I just did not think that was what I was going to hear today.
But you know what I'm talking about, though, right? You understand what I mean when I said it, right?
You used it before, and every single time you use it, I'm going like,
you know, to me like Oh my
Nope.
gosh. Oh man. But
Oh,
seriously though, that's like, there's biases in football, right? Like
yes.
I want that type of guy. I want the diva wide receiver. I want somebody that gets upset, visibly upset if they don't get the rock. And those guys were, Julio, not necessarily Julio, but you
Right.
talking about Randy and T.O., man. Whew, whew. And I talked to a couple of people, what I'm saying? Julio got a lot more upset than people think when he didn't get
Oh, yes.
those touchdowns because
Yeah.
the man only had 66 touchdowns in his career.
Right.
There's no way that man shouldn't have at least had 100.
Easily.
No way he should have had 100. So I just leave it at that. We'll talk about that on the sidebar. Maybe like an insider chat, and y'all can ask me about that, and I'll spill the beans. I promise you.
You give us all the tea. The tea. But you're right, because when you think about all of what Julio Jones could do, 66 touchdowns, like that's wow, like that's mind-blowing, because Tyreek Hill is already at 82. And granted, as the league has progressed, obviously touchdowns, quarterback play, high octane offenses, that's been the name of the game. So we do have that caveat of what Tyreek Hill has been and continues to be able to do, just because of, for lack of a better term, the era that he's playing in. That's just kind of how it goes. But
you can't talk about receivers nowadays.
Yep. Yeah. Well, see, you know what? That part. Yeah. Because same thing with Antonio Brown, like 83 touchdowns. Well, yeah, because you're in an era where you're pass happy. So that's kind of the way that it goes. But for you, Free, when you think about that list, starting with Julio Jones, is Julio in your top 3?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. If I'm coming up, and this is an interesting conversation, because like there's been so many good wide receivers over the last 25 years that like we could poll 100
You could talk
people.
about Larry Fitzgerald.
Yeah. And so, like for my
Reggie
3,
Wayne.
I'm like Julio, Calvin Johnson, and Larry Fitzgerald are my 3 in terms of like the 3 best receivers I've seen in the last 25 years. But like as Jarvis said, like I feel bad leaving Randy Moss out. I feel bad leaving T.O. out. Antonio Brown is definitely deserving. Tyreek Hill, one of the most game-changing wide receivers in the NFL at the peak of his powers and whatnot. And Justin Jefferson is on that track. If we sit here and have this conversation a decade from now, we'll probably be talking about Justin Jefferson as one of the best wide receivers and whatnot. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's hard to just narrow it down to 3. It's hard to narrow it down to 5. It's hard to narrow it down to 10 in terms of the best receiver that you've seen over the last 25 years. But certainly with Julio, I think for him, touchdowns withstanding, I'm still a little, bitter about it. I'm sure, as Jarvis said, Julio seems to be a little bitter about it as well. But like in terms of being the most dynamic threat on the planet, and you would always get like 4 to 6 games where Julio Jones was just like, I'm the best football player on the planet. And you would see that consistently year in out. You would see the same thing with Calvin Johnson. And like, for Larry Fitzgerald, obviously I'm a little biased because I'm a Pitt alum, but I feel like he was as good in terms of not necessarily being like, I'm just so dominant in terms of what Calvin and Megatron and Julio were able to do. But like Larry Fitzgerald just had that consistency in terms of just like no one can cover me, and so those are some of the guys, and Randy Moss is in that same boat. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's hard to just kind of narrow it down to 3, and sort of like Randy would be like 3B if I was ranking it into, I feel tough leaving him off the mark, but I'm not going to, leave Julio or Megatron or Fitzgerald off either, just to accommodate Randy.
And to even add to that, right? Like, go back to that catch of that game. Y'all know what I'm talking about. That probably would have gone down as one of the best catches in Super Bowl history. But the Falcons were able to pull that bad boy off. So I can understand how Julio may, feel just a little bit type of way, how things ended, with the Falcons. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's because you think about that, just that moment alone just makes me think that he should be a guaranteed first ballot Hall of Famer in my eyes.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's going to get in the first time.
Yeah.
Just my opinion. There's going to be a lot of stat nerds and be like, 66 touchdowns. But no, look at Look
They're
at the
not
game.
gonna dig in.
Look at the game. If you didn't watch Julio Jones during his peak, rookie year, all that, and just say, yep, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, just like I did with Calvin Johnson, I think there's something wrong with that. It's something wrong if y'all don't look at Julio and say, yeah, he's first ballot Hall of Fame. Sure.
Yeah. But I think all of the points that you just made are why a lot of people would probably question him being in that top 3. Larry Fitzgerald's situation is a little bit different because in getting to the Super Bowl, it was kind of like it was usurped from them. Thank God. That means the Steelers actually won in like modern history. But yeah, like that was usurped from the Cardinals, not necessarily in the way that it was for Julio Jones. So everything that happened with that game, unfortunately, kind of overshadows things. Whereas with Larry Fitzgerald, like, I mean, you were the Cardinals playing the Steelers. So the fact that you darn near outlasted them is legendary enough. But I think when you have a situation like that game for Julio Jones and the way it didn't go, and then you're with a franchise that's much maligned all the time, you're stuck. And that does make a difference. And I also, this was years ago, I went to the Pro Football Hall of Fame to see Jerry Rice get inducted. And one of the questions that I had was kind of asking, give me like just a general overview of some of the things that go into voting. And some of the things that go into voting, because you just mentioned Hall of Fame, just to kind of make the point, is who's in front of you? Like who in the hall from your team is there to be able to advocate for you? Let's just be honest. How many Falcons are there in there? Oh, wait. Claude Humphrey.
Yeah.
And do you know how long it took Claude Humphrey to get in?
Yeah.
So
you want to claim Morton Anderson? You can claim
did
him.
Morton Anderson? Did he go in as a Falcon?
No. I'm just saying he played for the Falcons. Then he's in the Hall of Fame.
But he didn't go in as a Falcon.
Right. So
Deion Sanders, did he go in as a Falcon?
I said if, T.
Right.
But
I'm making a point that to your point, Jarvis, did Deion go in as a Falcon?
I guess so. I guess.
I feel like Deion said something, but like, I remember him saying
as a Falcon.
I feel like he may have.
I feel like he went in as a Falcon.
I think he said like spiritually, I'm a Falcon going into the Hall of Fame or something like that.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm making that statement is because when you go in now, he, as they say, he recognized his contributions as a Falcon, but he also recognized his contributions as a Cowboy and a 49er too. But whatever the case, the stronger case that you have, especially if you're talking first ballot, is if you have multiple players in there from that franchise that can just that can then vouch for you. Or there are, and granted, D-Led has been in there. D'Orlando Ledbetter has been a voter for a number of years. So a lot of times the media could advocate for you as well if they get a vote. But yeah, I think when you talk about first ballot, you might be right. Does he deserve it? Absolutely. Will he get first ballot? It's going to be tight. It depends on who's going to be on that. Yeah, it depends on who's going to be on the ballot in 5 years. But ultimately, that's going to be very interesting because unfortunately, he comes from that space of a franchise that just does not have that type of cachet. But I will say this. I think that he deserves to be in that top 3. I think that you can make every argument about him being in that top 3 and worthy of the top 3. But I do agree with you guys. I don't necessarily know that I would put Antonio Brown and Tyreek Hill in there. Antonio Brown probably gets into that top 3, like sealing the deal because of his attachment to Tom Brady and his championship with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's just be honest, because Tom Brady, of course, was one of the 3 quarterbacks in that 25-year stretch that Pro Football Focus talked about. I think that was huge for him. And then I think for Tyreek Hill, much the same. Everything that you did as a Chief, winning championships, that's what really kind of. So again, it goes back to Jarvis. I hope that when it comes down to the Hall of Fame balloters, they don't just look at the stats because Julio Jones is way more than 66 touchdowns. That doesn't even tell the story of what his career was, not just for the Falcons, but just what his career meant to and how he made you look just a little bit differently at the game of football, and particularly how he made you look at the wide receiver position. But speaking of that, a group that never, ever underestimated what Julio Jones could be and could do was the Falcons fans. And somebody actually gave them love, saying that they were a good fan base. Oh my, we'll talk about whether or not their fans are fair weather or Falcons faithful when we come back. Aaron, when I saw this particular article, I literally had to do a double take. I was like, I'm sorry, what did somebody say the Falcons fans were actually a good bunch? So it doesn't really stop at football. Free. It's basketball. Now, not baseball. Jarvis and I will tell you in a heartbeat, we're Braves fans through and through. And this city is full of Braves fans that have been Braves fans lifelong. In fact, even on my radio show last night, like my producer was talking about the fact that his dad's been a Braves fan even since the Milwaukee days. When it comes to football, not the case at all. So the city often gets a lot of grief for A, not being a sports city, and B, certainly just being like fair weather fans. But Mina Kimes, she of ESPN, actually said that she gives the Falcons a thumbs up, puts them in her top 5 of fan bases because she says the Atlanta Falcons are the best fan base in the entire NFL. Quote, they've been through the most. Nobody's been through 28-3. They by far have the weirdest team. They endure all of this constant ongoing humiliation with equanimity, poise, and resilience. They also have the perfect blend of nihilism with a tiny bit of hope that I
had
find.
to look that one up. I ain't gonna lie. I ain't gonna flex.
Nihilism.
I had to look it up. Sorry. I'll admit.
She actually waxed very poetic with that one, Aaron.
Yeah, did.
I literally could not help myself when I saw this article. I said, I got to bring this to Aaron. I got to bring this to Jarvis because you guys are actual Falcons fans. I cover the team, but you guys are fans. So what do you think about this? That finally somebody is giving the Falcons fans some flowers? Wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, look, Atlanta sports fans always get a bad reputation because of all the things that you said, T. And it's nice to get recognized, but by people being like, hey, it's not nearly as bad as the reputation. The reputation kind of precedes the Falcons fan base, and I appreciate Mina because I feel like she nailed it with the sort of like, here we go again, sort of nihilism with the Falcons that you have to go through every year, and it's like for me. Every offseason, it takes like 3-4 months to kind of, all right, we're doing this all again. And then we get to this stage in the offseason. And it's like, all right, I guess we're doing this again. So look, I ain't got nowhere else to go. So let's go. Let's go. So and then Falcon. And then you're just like, all right, we're doing this all over again. Right. And it's just like that repetitive cycle over and over and over again, can be frustrating, but I think it's sort of endearing in a lot of ways. Like, I've always joked, like, if you get 3 Falcon fans in the same room together, eventually the conversation will always turn to, you remember this time when the Falcons did this terrible thing, and misery will always sort of the cream will rise to the top. And like, I feel like that's just part of the ethos of being a Falcons fan, where it's just like, man, we've been through the ringer with this stuff.
All that.
We still keep coming back, so, it makes us, it builds character is basically what I always tell you, particularly younger Falcon fans, where it's just like, you see me jaded after 3 decades of rooting for this football team, but it's just like, it builds a certain type of character with Falcon fans. And you reach a certain point where it's like, all right, we're doing this again, I guess. Let's do it. Let's go. Rise up, all that stuff.
So Jarvis, when Aaron was saying that reminded me of being at one of my little spots in East Atlanta last week. Guy standing behind me, and I heard my name called, so I thought, but I was like, oh, maybe they're calling me for my order. But then I sit down and somebody comes to the table and they ask me if I'm, Tenitra, and I said, yeah. And he says he watches the Atlanta football party faithfully every Monday, every Wednesday, Thursday, every
baby.
Yeah, Pharrell is right, exactly. Pharrell is in the building. And of course, I asked him, what do you think about the Falcons? And like Aaron said, it was almost like he got happy and sad. I was like, does he need to be on the couch? Like, I don't know what's going on. So it was like a myriad of emotions within like 3 to 5 minutes of talking. But Jarvis, I think that's the life of a Falcons fan. But like you guys said, like Free said, 3 decades in and I'm still here because darn it, where am I going?
Yeah, like, I'm born and raised here. I didn't choose where I would be born. You know what I'm saying? I didn't choose this.
Wait a minute.
I was born into it. You know what I'm saying?
I was born in New Orleans. I know Saints fan. What are we talking about here?
I mean,
smart. Like heart attacks and headaches.
See, like, I'm Atlanta through and through, baby. You know what I'm saying? Like, people,
Okay, well, that's true. Yeah.
I can't, this is who I am. I talk about sports for a living. And you can still hear my Atlanta accent. You know what I'm saying? It ain't going nowhere. I'm sorry. If you don't like it, I'm so sorry. But this is who I am. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I can go through a myriad of emotions talking about this team. Absolutely. From the highs of going up there and beat those Vikings when nobody thought they were going to do it. Nobody. Till the Super Bowl where the guy who was nominated for Walter Payton Man of the Year trying to solicit a prostitute. So yes, that's the game, baby. That's the game. That's the game of being an Atlanta Falcons fan. Like, and let's take it on to the Super Bowl 28-3. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna go too deep into it. Man, do you understand? I don't think y'all understand this. So I'm gonna take y'all behind the curtain a little bit. I got a text from my homeboy. Y'all probably heard this story before. I got a text from my homeboy. He just talked with the owner of Magic City. And he said that the Falcons win the Super Bowl, we open it up. We opening this thing up for that. Do you understand? Like, what happened that night? You know what I'm saying? My wife gave me a pass, baby. Not that type of pass. But you know what I'm saying? I could go. You know what I'm saying? I had permission to go. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm a man of faith, but you know what I'm saying? We're gonna go out and celebrate, baby. You know, we're gonna celebrate. We're gonna figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna pray afterwards. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna go home. So when you understand, like, all the things that go into being a Falcons fan, it's just the highs are high and them lows are low.
Low.
So yeah, appreciate you, Mina, for understanding what we have to go through. You know, it's not the Bills. Yeah, exactly. It's not the Bills where all y'all got to do is go to Bills games and you ain't got nothing else to do. You're like, do you understand how much it is that you can get into in Atlanta?
Right. And yet you still choose to get into the Falcons.
Yeah. You don't have to, T.
No, but you choose to. But you choose to stick it out and say with them. And Jarvis, if I can take a little bit of liberty here, we don't often go into the comments, but since this is a fans topic, I got to go into some of these comments because one of the comments Kiara said, if you know what NGL means, that 2023 season had me burning my Falcons blanket. We know what NGL means. And she said, for real, I was fed up, but I'm still here. And then she says, if someone is a Falcons fan, you know they're loyal. That's true. That's true because I mean, like, you don't mind a little bit of torture, aggravation, frustration, go up to go down. And the sad thing is when I was in Dallas when that game was taking place, and I was getting text on top of text on top of text at halftime. Yeah. And please don't take this in a negative way, but I said, my friends were like, oh my God, the ones who were physically here, some were Falcons fans, some were not. And they said, the city about to be lit. And I said, no, the city's about to be sad. You guys are about to lose this game. And they were like, what did you just say?
Blooded T.
And then I started laying it out. I told him everything I saw in the second quarter that was going to meet in, and man, third quarter, we're still in the lead. Third quarter, all of a sudden, I started getting, those eye emojis, the big eye emojis. Over time, I didn't hear from anybody. But unfortunately,
it's your fault, T. It's your fault. You called this out, and it's so everybody.
That was my New Orleans.
We just discovered it on
May 19th. That's what I did. All right, that's what I did. No, but for real, I said the sad thing is the city deserves so much better, but they're not going to get it. But I did lay it out from a football perspective, right? On what I saw in the second quarter that told me, okay, this is what Bill Belichick is going to do at halftime. This is what Dan Quinn is not going to do at halftime, and this is why this game, as ugly as it sounds, is going to not go in the Falcons' favor. But then Jay says, with Falcon fans, team got to earn it. Collard green eating, blue collar workers, swag wearing ATLians cannot confirm or deny. Jam says my alcoholism starts at week 1. Is comes back and says optimistic PTSD. And then he says, but I got to say this one and then we're going to move on. See, you merely adopted the A. Yeah, I didn't adopt the Falcons. I adopted Atlanta, and Atlanta adopted me. I did not adopt the Falcons, so I said what I said, bro. And but what I will say is this: I want to have a show with Aaron Freeman, Jarvis Davis, Tori McElhaney, and Maria Martin talking about this city experiencing what my hometown experienced. I am not a Saints fan, but I went back to celebrate with my family because it is an unbelievable thing to see 250,000 people in our case, because it's New Orleans. So you got like real Mardi Gras floats, Gras floats out there, award-winning international bands celebrating a championship. Like, I cannot tell you that feeling for them. I do want that for the city because I do love Atlanta. And I think that the Falcons fans, you deserve it. You do.
What gives you the impression that I'm coming to work on that Monday if the Falcons win the Super Bowl? I ain't gonna be here. I'll tell you that right now. If the Falcons
we're gonna be live. We're gonna be we'll be live. Yeah,
I'm gonna be doing the show walking down the street.
Like, we're gonna be on Peachtree, people.
Free. Yeah. Y'all can mark it. Free. If the Falcons win the Super Bowl, you know I'm paying for your flight to come down here, right?
Oh yeah. Oh no,
I got you, bro.
No,
I'm going to be here to watch you get fired live on the air. The nonsense that you're going to get to, on that victory parade. So I'm going to be here.
We're like, wait, our producers in our ears saying what? Saying Jarvis is no longer with us. Okay. And
David
live from Magic
watching
City,
that
we have
stream
the release of Jarvis Davis. Oh my goodness!
I'm like, David, we're going live, baby. I'm in the spot. Just let you know.
Live.
Find the corner. I'm gonna find the corner to go to.
Shut it down.
That, like, for real, somebody just put in the chat. GATX boy, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means Georgia, Texas boy, but he says Falcons win the Super Bowl. I'm flying in from Arizona. But I gotta say this real quick, guys, and I know we're going off the rail, but hey, why don't we just stay off the rails the last 3 minutes? That's kind of what we do. But I think that when you think about, what is this, guys? I'm going back to, is it 2018 when Atlanta United won the championship, right? Yeah. They won the cup. Yeah. Great to win the MLS Cup. Like, that's awesome. Congratulations to Arthur Blank for all of the things that he did to put that franchise in position to win so early in their tenure. And obviously, you got two Braves fans from like lifers. So, of course, excited to see the Braves get back to it and win it all. We haven't kind of sniffed out with the Hawks quite yet. And it's been a long time since the Dream have gotten into the finals. But that said, putting all of those professional teams in perspective, there is nothing. And I've been to a Super Bowl celebration, as I just mentioned to you guys, also been to an NBA championship parade with the 5th championship for the Chicago Bulls. So that's big, not saying it's big stuff because it's me, but it's big stuff because that was the Bulls. So that was a huge celebration. But I got to say, I don't think there would be anything like a Super Bowl championship celebration. And I don't think there will be anything. It will be the likes of which have not been seen if the Falcons are able to do this.
The thing about that, T, like, I'm wholeheartedly agree with you, because there's one thing about Atlanta. People understand, y'all listen to, you live in the city, you understand that there are pockets everywhere, right? Yes. Around the city. If you are of a certain pocket, you can go find your pocket and really easily in this town. But on Sundays at 1:00 on Mercedes-Benz Stadium, all the pockets come together. So if you have the Falcons winning one of those bad boys, it's going to be different than a Braves one. As much as I love the Braves, it's different. It's going to be different because all those pockets come together at 1:00 on Sundays and cope and sit in misery together. So if a Super Bowl were to happen with that team, with this team, it's going to be a movie. I can say that much.
And especially now that the thing I always say is, like, if you're still here after 28-3, like, you ain't going nowhere. And like, you can, and it's like, you can survive anything. Like, that's part of it, where it's just like, all right, like, none of this is as bad as I felt that night, in February back in 2015. So like, I can endure all this misery or whatever. And so I think that only makes it what you're talking about, T and Jarvis, that if they do get to that mountaintop, it's only going to taste even sweeter, I think, moving forward, coming off of, that game that we don't like to talk about.
Right.
Yeah. And Aaron, you're right, because again, the team that shall remain nameless from my hometown that's how that was the feeling. Like, it was palpable. You had grown men, grown women in tears because they were like, hey, we can remember when we were in a stadium for, I don't know, over a decade that wasn't our own. We can remember when we would still go to a game, but we would have a brown paper bag over our heads. Like, the feeling of like just release and just joy to finally have gotten to the top of the mountain. I mean, it was palpable, and I could definitely see that for the Falcons as well. And just to end on a very positive, very football party note, I'll go with what Jam said. I think it's going to be like free Nick. Ooh, I would be here for it. Oh, I would be so here for it. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen. And of course, check out some of Tori's work at AtlantaFalcons.com. She'll be back with us next week. We'll see you then.